excuse me, Maastricht Principles on the human rights of future generations. A great success that we have this year. And not saying more, I would like to give first the floor to Felix Kirchmeier, who will give us a welcome in the name of the Geneva Academy.
Thank you very much, Anna Maria, and welcome to all of you. Welcome here at Villa Moigné at the Geneva Academy. It's a pleasure to host this discussion and this launch of the new commentary here at the Academy. It's such an important and forward-looking academic work, in which actually many of our NGO colleagues and also a member of our advisory board of the Geneva Human Rights Platform had been involved. And I just want to have a quick look back at the principles themselves, on which Sandy Liebenberg, chair of the drafting group of the guidelines, and then also former member of the Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, said, "The single most important contribution of the Maastricht Principles is its recognition of future generations as holders of internationally recognized human rights, which contrasts with recent UN instruments referring to the interests of future generations." She further said that the Maastricht Principles recognize that states must impose reasonable restrictions on activities that will threaten the enjoyment of human rights by future generations, including the unsustainable use of natural resources and the destruction of nature to meet their obligations to future generations. The commentary is very comprehensive, and you have actually paper copies in the back of the room, but a QR code to flash, and I think also it will be shared with colleagues with us here tonight online, so that you can actually have a look at the document itself. It's comprehensive. It has some 200 pages. It's going in depth on all the aspects of the principles, and I'm looking very much forward to hearing of some of those aspects from the speakers tonight. I think it's also quite a special setting in which we are also globally with what I would describe also as a war on science and a war on education. But unfortunately, it's not only the blatant case in the United States, but seems to be part of a much broader anti-rights movement. It may also be a revelation, actually, to some on the exaggerated dependence we have not only in security policy, but also in scientific policy on the United States. The Maastricht guidelines, in a way, and I think the commentary there also with it, are an antidote to those policies. While global politics currently are run mostly by old men who probably hope they will be 6 feet under or on Mars when the shit hits the fan, the Maastricht guidelines shift the focus on young and coming generations. Now, that's not to be ageist. I don't want to say that elder people could not do politics mindful of coming generations. And actually, we have also an example just here in Switzerland, where the Swiss Elder Women for Climate took their beloved home country to the court over insufficient action on climate change. And while they base, of course, their claim on their own vulnerable situation as elderly people, they clearly stated that they run this case for the generations to come, for the future generations. So I think in this setting, I'm very excited to have the possibility to host this discussion tonight here. And again, would also welcome the people, of course, in the room, but those with us online as well. Which brings me to the housekeeping point before I hand it over back to you. So just for all of you to know, we are on a public webinar. This webinar is being recorded, and we want to also make it available to people who'd like to watch it afterwards, because we had a lot of interest actually from people around the globe. So I think we have a lot of people who are with us online now, but others who for time zone reasons couldn't, so it will be recorded. So just for you to know when later on you do take the floor. But with this, back over to you, Anna Maria.
Thank you very much, Felix. I would like to begin thanking to CIEL, to the Geneva Academy for Human Rights and the Geneva Human Rights Platform, also to the organization of Charon, which is the Northwest Territories Treaty, and of course to the Office of the High Commissioner. This is a collective event that gathers us again, and very important in times where in some countries people do not know if they will have a future. Some people that last year told me when we were speaking about the summit of the future, if it would not be the summit of no future. But we are still on the struggle, and we think that not only the people in the present under the principle of intergenerational justice, but also the people to come should have the possibility to enjoy their rights. And in this sense, the Maastricht Principles on the human rights of future generations are a very interesting document that help us to see which are the standards in international law that sustain these rights, the legal sources, but also to look into different cosmovisions. This process towards the principles was initiated in 2017, and we had consultations with more than 200 individuals in different regions of the world. We had case studies, jurisprudence studies, and after 5 years of process in 2023, in February, the principles were adopted, and then we did some launches. But of course, the principles are so general. And that's why the commentary that we are launching today becomes a very important document, because it contains sources, explanations that help us to interpret the principles, and also to think on how states and how decision makers could make use of them to ensure intra and intergenerational justice. So this is a very important document and very substantial. And therefore, I would like to give the more possible time to our speakers. It's a very interesting panel. We have here Sharon Many Fingers. Sharon belongs to the Northwest Territories Treaty A Trivial Corporation. We have Rina Cusipalo, Cusipalo from the Office of the High Commissioner on Human Rights. We have Mr. Milun Kothari, who is an independent expert on human rights, but has also been special rapporteur on the right to housing and a great activist and human rights defender, not only an expert. And we will finish with Neshan Gunasekera, who is part of the World Future of Council and the Raoul Wallenberg Institute. When I introduce you, I can say more about you. So a very, very interesting panel with different constituencies. With this, I would like to begin. We will have some main questions for each one of you. And then we will have a general question, because as said in the concept note of this event, we want to learn about the content and the highlights of the commentary. Impossible to say in half hour all what is inside. This is just the appetizer for you to read it. But we will also explore how these principles, with the support of the commentary, could be used at the national level, at the regional level, and at the international level for shaping legal frameworks and for policy making. So with this, I would like to begin with Milun. Milun, as you are part of the drafting group of the Maastricht Principles, but also of the commentary, I would like to ask you to give us an overview of what you think are the highlights in the commentary that could be very interesting for our public today. Taking into account that, of course, climate and environment is very important, but the principles also touch other topics like nuclear weapons, digital technologies, austerity, debt, and other fields where we have very, very big risks for our future generations. So, Milun, please.
Thanks very much, Ana Maria. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to try in the few minutes that I have. It's impossible to cover this entire scope of the principles of the commentary, but I'm going to pick up on some key precepts, concepts that are in the principles and the commentary, and I'll give you some keywords that those of you who are interested can later on do a search through this very, very long document. I just want to begin by saying that we live in very dystopian times. Everybody that I meet is generally depressed, and we are all dealing with very horrendous situations at local areas around the world. But when I was preparing for this evening's panel, I was reading through the commentary, and it really helped me, because one of the positive dimensions that I don't know if we managed to capture, but that is in the commentary is the concept of the continuum of time. So we're connecting the past, the present, and the future. And we are doing that within a sort of a holistic understanding of human rights. It says in the preamble that humanity is part of the world, not apart from it. The rights of future generations must be interpreted and applied in light of humanity's dependence on and responsibility to Earth's natural systems, now and throughout our species' future. So, so this concept of the continuum of time, we are saying in the principles that human generations exist within an unbroken continuum that is continually renewed and redefined as untold new members join the living human community. Any treatment of human generations and their respective rights must recognize and reflect this, this continuum. The second point, which is related to this, and on the continuum, I just want to say that all indigenous and living faith-based traditions recognize the dynamic of the continuum, and on the indigenous, we will hear more from Sharon. The second point I want to make is, which runs through the commentary, is this notion of intra and intergenerational human rights obligations. The historical injustices that affect the enjoyment of human rights in the present require so there's a strong focus in the principles on the interlinkages between intra and intergenerational human rights and the measures required to eliminate intergenerational discrimination and disadvantage. An example of the latter is according less value to future lives and rights through discounting the impacts and burdens of the present conduct of on future generations. To carry this forward, the commentary and the principles also have this notion of intergenerational duties and trusteeship, which are very important. These stem from a partnership amongst all generations, where each generation must act as a trustee of the earth and its inhabitants for future generations to ensure that they inherit their just share of natural resources and cultural heritage. Each generation is therefore also a beneficiary of previous generations' stewardship. Intergenerational duties and trusteeship are essential means by which future generations can hold previous generations accountable. And in this, the prevention and precaution in decision-making where there are reasonable grounds for concern that present conduct may result in violations of human rights of future generations, and the critical importance, we point out, of building a new international order based on the principle of international solidarity. It's another key word that is in the document. And I also wanted to say that we also worked on recognizing that, and it's very clear that faith traditions and the indigenous traditions very much respect all of these and teach us about all of these principles that I was talking about before. So if you look at diverse belief systems and faith traditions, followed by the majority of the world's population, each in their unique way acknowledge the responsibilities of present generations towards future generations and should be recognized in upholding the human rights of future generations. So, for example, various expressions of the Christian faith endorse the concept of stewardship, emphasizing the collective responsibility to protect, cherish, and pass on the natural environment to future generations. Islamic faith expressions recognize Khilafah, which views present generations as stewards of the earth and all other created beings. The Islamic doctrine recognizes that the earth is a joint usufruct in which each generation uses and makes the best use of nature according to its need without disrupting or adversely affecting the interests of future generations. The practice of Sufism, the mystical dimension of the Islamic tradition, further regards the conservation and protection of the natural environment as a spiritual priority, emphasizing the need to preserve it and pass it on to future generations in its best possible form. Hinduism contains a wide range of beliefs and teachings advocating for responsibility towards future generations. Hinduism encourages living a life of dharma, a harmonious balance of fulfilling one's duties while maintaining harmony with oneself, others, and the broader world, including future generations. I mean, I could go on, but the commentary also explores what Buddhist teachings have to teach us, what rabbinic teachers have to say, the Baha'i faith, Shintoism, and so on. And if I have just 30 seconds, Anna Maria, I wanted to say that for me, a very important dimension in the principles was also that we emphasize the importance of land, which is sort of undeveloped in global standards. But the critical issue of land as a sustaining and empowering human right has to be protected for future generations. And we need to recognize the intrinsic link between humankind and land and ecosystems of which humanity is a part. Thanks very much.
I would have many comments, but I prefer to let time for our public to ask you. I just want to remember that in one of the consultations, somebody told us in indigenous communities, in those of them, they are very different indigenous communities, we think that we are the guardians of the planet of our grandchildren. And this is more or less what you are saying. And the interesting thing with the principles is that we have the legal basis for it. And I think very important on the issue of land, you are saying next year, for example, we have an international conference on land reform and rural rural policies, and it's extremely relevant because rural reforms cannot be now as they were in the 70s. We have other challenges, and we should look in the long term, inspired by the continuum that you mentioned. So thank you very much for that. We will continue with Sharon Manyfingers, who will speak how does the commentary incorporate this wisdom of indigenous peoples, and why is this relevant for us? Sharon, please.
Good evening, and thank you very much. First of all, for asking me to sit on one of as a drafter of this the declaration that we worked on, which was not easy to do. There was a lot of things that had to be discussed, and everybody was very cooperative and worked together. So that was very interesting process to go through. And then the drafting of the commentary, which is, I think, also, it's important to understand the commentary to see why we drafted the way we did. Because if you just read it like that, you may not understand how it fits in. And so indigenous peoples had we had a lot to bring to this, because we were raised from early on to think about the future generations and how we interact with the world around us. And in one of the drafting groups, I talked about, I was probably 3 or 4 years old when I learned about the future generations when I was picking berries with my grandmother, and she said I couldn't pick all the berries of that one place. I had to leave some for the birds, I had to leave some for the animals, and we had to leave some to make seeds so that they'll grow again. And that's really thinking about the future generations in a very real way. And not that she said that I was getting a lesson in the rights of future generations. She just put it out like, this is what you got to think about. And when we're doing things, I think everybody has to think, what is the implication of your action? How is this action going to impact the future generations? And because the Earth is in dire need, dire stress right now, it's very important to try to understand what does it really mean to talk about future generations, because it's a very difficult for a lot of non-Indigenous thinkers, it's a very difficult concept to understand that you have to put somebody else ahead of you, because Western European human rights have been developed as an individual making decisions for that individual. Whereas we're talking about that individual now has to think outside themselves to think about what their actions are going to do to the future generations and how that's going to affect the future generations. So drafting that into the document was really an interesting exercise. And then trying to bring those concepts throughout the document so that it's reflective in the whole document. And I personally am kind of biased, I guess, because I worked on the drafting, but I think that we were quite successful in doing that. And the commentary is also, we've included some or references to oral teachings by our people. English only. I'm sorry. I think we tried to find a Spanish one at one point. I don't think we were successful at that. Did we get a Spanish one? Anyway, but what we tried to do was find where people could listen to people talking about it rather than just reading about it, that they would listen to it and that might make more impact on them, because we're an oral tradition people and we don't want to have to write everything down to pass the message. So the oral tradition is quite important. So I had recommended some links that could be put in the commentary as referencing different things. So it was trying to grow the international framework to include not only other points of view from religions and other things, but that we also had something to contribute to the whole process.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sharon. And of course, it was very intended by us to get an Indigenous person as knowledgeable as you in this group. Similar, we said this cannot be again a group of white academicians from the global north. They are also important, but we need to have the diversity. And in this sense, your voice has been extremely important. Of course, in the consultations, we also invited other representatives of Indigenous peoples. And I think you remember us that this civilization forgot what is the common sense and what is the sense of responsibility. And it seems to be that we have to do law again to remember people that is common sense, that we take care of the planet we depend on. So fortunately, Indigenous peoples haven't forget it. And in this sense, it seems to be that looking into the visions of Indigenous peoples is not going back, as many think, but it's going forward to ensure that our humanity and our planet continue living. And in this sense, all the legal sources that are included in the commentary help us to create an anti-colonial vision, an anti-oppressive vision, and a visionary legal tool. So this is quite interesting. And in this sense, I would like to ask you, Rina, how can the principles and the commentary contribute to the advancement of international law from your experience in these global institutions that sometimes feel very far from the people, but that have a big influence on what governments do, especially regarding environmental rights in the context of intergenerational justice, and taking into account that we have climate change, but the environmental crisis is holistic. We also have contamination that is making us sick and that may make our children and the children of our children more sick, and that is really also destroying the biodiversity. And without biodiversity, if we lose the balance of our ecosystems, we don't know what will happen to this humanity. So Rina, please bring us through this reflection, please.
Thank you so much for having us here from the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. And it's really a privilege to be among such distinguished colleagues here. And I will be speaking on behalf of the Environment and Climate Change unit there, and reflecting on the significant contribution that these principles and the commentary to them can make to international law, including human rights law, in the context of intergenerational equity. So, so these are really crucial to deepening our understanding of human rights obligations across time and space as well. And I'll focus really on the international human rights law and UN instruments, and highlighting some of those aspects from the commentary. So the principles ground intergenerational equity really in existing human rights instruments and other international law instruments, which is very important to remember. They advance progressive interpretations that do seek to respond to contemporary global challenges from climate change to pollution. But it's important to remember that these obligations already exist, and they don't create new rights, but really go into what's already inherent in human rights, and that these rights apply really across space and time. The UN Charter, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and core human rights treaties contain principles that, when properly interpreted, extend protection across generations. The Charter's preamble explicitly connects its purpose to protecting succeeding generations from the scourge of war as a core reason for the Charter's adoption and UN's establishment. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, its drafting history shows, as mentioned in the commentary, that it was intended to ensure that future generations would enjoy fundamental rights. The Secretary General's call to action for human rights more recently has highlighted the rights of future generations, especially regarding climate justice, and treaty bodies have also extensively spoken to this. And advancing the UN system's approach on intergenerational equity, the principles also align with and advance recent developments. The UN system had these common principles on future generations earlier, which emphasized long-term governance, humanity's responsibility to strive for sustainable development, and so on. And then last year in September, there was the UN Declaration on Future Generations, which recognizes that also in a similar definition, that future generations are those generations that do not yet exist and are yet to come, but will inherit this planet. And the office supported the inclusion of human rights elements in the declaration and the mention of specific rights, and was also involved in the earlier work. On human rights, the declaration refers to needs and interests instead of rights, but it does make human rights guiding principle and includes language on specific rights, on health groups, women and indigenous peoples, and language that's convergent with human rights obligations that exist. And these principles and commentary can really play a key role in advancing and clarifying what the declaration will mean in practice, because it was the result of a long intergovernmental negotiation process and can be used. And I think this gives it really a lot of substance and a lot for states to work with when they think about how to actually apply the declaration. Regarding, again, going back to the principles, they also very importantly emphasize universality and indivisibility of human rights, which is also reaffirmed in the Pact for the Future. And these align with the Secretary General's report on intergenerational solidarity, which affirms that our obligations toward future generations stem from the equal concern and respect that we owe to all humans, regardless of where and when they may have been born. And also, for instance, the Human Rights Committee in its general comment on right to life has spoken to the fact that environmental degradation, climate change, and unsustainable development constitute some of the most pressing and serious threats to the ability of present and future generations to enjoy the right to life, and just showing kind of the interrelatedness and inseparability of rights that goes throughout. And finally, the principles also can help us to enhance the normative coherence of international law. in important ways. They interpret human rights law in alignment with environmental law, which also contains a recognition of intergenerational equity in different instruments. They recognize that the realization of human rights, the right to food, to health, and so on, depend on on the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment as well. And for instance, the guiding principle 5 of the Declaration on Future Generations also doesn't speak to the right, but it speaks to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment as a kind of precondition for realizing intergenerational equity. And then just to link to some recent world events as well, in the context of armed conflicts, these can also be very relevant. For instance, the UN Environment Programme's assessment of the invasion of Ukraine identified thousands of possible incidents of pollution and degradation of ecosystems that it said produced an intergenerational toxic legacy there. And this is, of course, not the only place. So that's one area. And then finally, also there are so many important elements relating to non-discrimination and really not extending the protection to future generations by not perpetuating policies that are discriminatory and not repeating those discriminatory policies in the future. So really, in conclusion, it's very important that we take this commentary up and all the legal content that is there, and use it as a comprehensive approach to linking the many existing UN instruments, international frameworks that can help ensure the promise that each generation passes on to the next the full enjoyment of human rights. So, thanks.
Thank you very much, Rina. I think that was very clear. And we have to remember that any of the treaties say the treaties apply only to the generation of the governments that are in place. In fact, the treaties do not have physical limits. That's why we had before the principles on the extraterritorial obligations of the states, but they do not have generational limits. And that's more or less what you were explaining. Very interesting was the debate in the process on the Declaration on Future Generations regarding the human rights. We oppose to that, and that's why I fully support your idea that these have to be interpreted together, especially because the declaration includes needs or interests regarding future generations, which is very relative. The interests that I can define of a future generation are very different of those that Elon Musk can understand. And interests are not defined anywhere in international law, neither the needs. And that's why human rights are an excellent standard, because we have a huge corpus juris on what the human rights are, what they mean. And also the treaty bodies are all the time ensuring that these visions of human rights are updated to the needs of, to the real situation of our societies, same as, for example, the Human Rights Council in its resolution. So in this sense, let us read these two together. And of course, the commentary is very helpful in this sense. So to finish this first round, I would like to ask Neshan to give us a view on what does this mean to have this commentary in the 21st century, and especially what does it mean for international law beyond human rights law? Yeah, from your experience, my phone died, and that's why I'm not reading the bio that you sent me. But we know that you have worked a lot on these topics, and if you want to introduce the public to the work you have done, please feel free to do so.
Thank you, Anna Maria. Great pleasure to be here. Good evening, everyone. First and foremost, congratulations to the drafting committee. It's an incredible effort of almost 8 to 9 years I've been privileged to be part of it, including the launch of the principles in February and July 2023, and now the commentary here. It's a historic day, 25 years into the 21st century, Anna Maria. That's where we are. And I must first say thank you for the waters and the mountains that surround us. I think that's what allows us to have this conversation today. And I'm glad that we have an indigenous leader with us. And that's where I will borrow a leaf from my brother Milun to talk about the past, present, and future of the intergenerational dimension, how international law is at an apex moment this century, in a period of transition, and highlight 2 or 3 key points that allows us to see this in a positive light. And I must also thank the Global Campus of Human Rights and Right Livelihood Foundation for making it possible for me to be present today and to join this conversation. First, Judge Veera Mantri, one of my mentors and a Right Livelihood laureate, had this quote almost 30, 40 years ago. He said the 20th century was a century of lost opportunity. We had the famous 1899 First Hague Peace Conference, which allowed us to have the first international adjudication mechanism, the Permanent Court of Arbitration. Fast forward that 125 years, we've had the League of Nations, the PCIJ, the ICJ, the ICC, and plethora of international, regional, domestic mechanisms. But internationally, we had this. And he said the 21st century is the century of last opportunity for humanity to put the home, Earth, into order. He highlighted this in context of the nuclear weapon and the nuclear issue, because this August will mark not only the commentary of Maastricht Principles being officially launched, but it will also mark 80 years since the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombing. And there are still those young people, 5, 6, 7 years old, who were present in the 6th and the 8th of August, 1945, still talking about it today. We owe it to them. And I believe the Maastricht Principles and the commentary is looking forcefully at our past so that our future can be informed very well. Another thing that the commentary does really well, and I was speaking to Milun also about this, it really synergizes various movements, not merely the human rights and environmental law movements. It also brought together a massive number, especially from the Global South, who are working as ecologists and who are purely working in scientific basis and social policies and human rights defenders. I think that's another key element that needs to be highlighted. And finally, on the point of history, it was a generation of human life ago when Judge Veera Mantri and his brothers and sisters of the ICJ delivered the historic opinion on the nuclear weapons case, which was possibly the most important case at that time in 1996. 2 years later, he would deliver the Gabčíkovo-Negimorov separate opinion, which has been referred quite well in the commentary, which he talks about the principles of trusteeship, the very first principle of international environmental law. Fast forward that 30 years later, we have this fantastic group of young leaders coming from the Pacific Island states, changing the momentum of the future of international law by picking it up and saying, we will not take a no for an answer. They go to the United Nations, get the whole UN membership to agree to put this question on future generations and climate change to the highest court in the world. Is that not a moment where we are transitioning of not a power-based rules order, rules governed by principles of international law? And my final point is here, what the Maastricht commentary and the principles for me attempts to do in possibly the next 30 years is build on processes such as the Earth Charter, which was one of the most consultative processes ever known to humankind over the last 30 years, talking about humans as part of community of life. That builds into what I would call in international legal terms, a pacta sunt servanda with future generations. That is not the pact for the future. Pacta sunt servanda is a foundational principle of international law, basically meaning we have promises to the future and we have to keep them. Thank you, Anna Maria.
Thank you very much, Neshan. It's very interesting, especially to begin with the idea of a period of transition, which I personally feel began to be very evident with the COVID. And in the area I work, which is the one of the right to food and food systems, it's very clear that we are in a fight between the model that we want to arrive in this moment of transition. Will this be a model where only profit guides how we manage this world? Or will it be a model that takes care of the people and the planet? And this is the fight. And in this sense, I think the Pacta Sunt Servanda, based on the principles, is a very good tool for the youth and for children as well. Maybe this revolution will take a long time, and we need many people that are engaged. And I would just, before I go into the second round, also highlight 3 elements that I think are very relevant and that are also dealt with in the commentary. The first is the issue of gender justice. And it's clear that if the gender injustices of today and those of the past are not changed, to realize the human rights of the future generations of girls and women and also LGBTIQ communities will be impossible. Similarly, I think the issue of digitalization. We don't know what is happening with all the data that is now captured by the big techno bros, as they are called. So in a project that we were monitoring on carbon markets in Colombia, a bank from Holland and Microsoft are collecting all the data on how the farmers produce, which patterns of planting they have, and we don't know what will happen with this and how this can be used against their children. And similarly, the genetic engineering. We know that many varieties that are not existing now are being patented because they are foreseen by artificial intelligence. And this will affect everyone, including, of course, indigenous peoples and peasants and other rural communities. So all this shows that the problem is not one and that we need these convergences. And it's great that you mentioned that convergences are a big add-on of this process. But of course, now we all only have the glimpse on the content, the appetizer for you to read. And it would be great to think, how do we translate that into reality? We see that many of us are going to the streets, many of us are doing advocacy at the UN, others are litigating at national level, but we do not see too much change in what is happening in the life of the people that are oppressed and exploited. And the idea is to explore a bit, how could we make change, at least beginning with policies at the national, from the national to the international, or from the local to the international. And in this sense, I would like to invite our panelists to share with us some ideas on how the principles can be integrated into international and national legal and policy frameworks to ensure that the human rights are protected across generations. You were very brave with the time, so we are not as pressed as we should be. You have 3-4 minutes, and then we would have some time for interaction with our participants, both in person and online. And I also see that here there are very interesting comments already in the virtual room. So let us begin with Sharon. Would you begin with the practical part of it?
I think we spent a lot of time talking about this over the last few years, about how to get the information out into the communities where it would really be really helpful to people to think about it and to be able to act on it. And it because of what's happening in the technology world, we have to be careful because the data can be manipulated. And I'm always really concerned about data management and how that could be influence how people are being told about things that they need to think about for the future generations and how information is shared. So we have to, as well, we've talked about it, about how we can have I don't know, regional discussions within our nations. I mean, I'm talking about indigenous nations, but also within different state entities, and take every advantage of when there's a forum that looks like we could raise this issue, that we should try to get on a panel and make it available. Like we did that thing with the World Churches. Remember that thing in Chicago? Yeah, the big thing in Chicago, where you talked about all the people that came together from churches to really start them thinking about it and what they could do. I think that's where we have to kind of figure out where these places are and insert ourselves into those discussions. And also in the drafting of anything new, or anything passed, I guess, and try to get it into litigation, if our people are talking about litigation, and put it in there. I think there's a couple of cases where people have actually brought it forward about the rights of future generations in the decisions that the judges could make. So that, there's all kinds of avenues that we've explored and that should continue to be explored and to talk about it.
Thank you very much. Sharon, we can continue with Rin.
Thank you again, and I'll again provide some things that relate more to the UN side, but really these principles in the commentary can offer really concrete guidance for states to operationalize their obligations that, as said, are already in existence, and those with regard to future generations, and really overall, I think there's an emphasis on long-term thinking and planning, facilitating science and evidence-based decision-making in line with best available science. And this includes also the precautionary principle, as highlighted in the commentary. And on this, for example, the Committee on the Rights of the Child has said that states bear the responsibility for foreseeable environment-related threats arising as a result of their acts or omissions now, the full implications of which may not manifest for years or even decades. And this points really to the need to make policies and laws with that long-term vision in mind, including human rights impact assessments, environmental impact assessments. These should include impacts on the rights of future generations. On institutionalizing representation, this is also important to respond to the representational disadvantage that future generations face. And the Secretary General has proposed appointing a special envoy for future generations for this purpose, for instance, which is also mentioned there in the commentary. And then one area, which Ana Maria also mentioned, is this again, like kind of redressing patterns of discrimination, including gender inequality, and the latest political declaration on the 30th anniversary of the Fourth World Conference on Women also spoke to intergenerational equity in that regard. And then finally, one other area of policy and law where this can be very important is looking at just transition policies and laws and integrating intergenerational justice here, because really this is very connected. For instance, the Principle 21 recognizes that a failure to invest adequate resources in a fair and just transition away from fossil fuels and other ecologically harmful activities would constitute a violation of the rights of future generations. And then the commentary speaks also to adequate investment in a just transition, and then this also goes to the final kind of enabling condition for all of this, which relates to financing and international cooperation and the whole architecture of debt relief and so on, because without these things, there will be a very unequal world for the future generations to inherit. Thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you, Rina. Maybe we can continue with Neshan.
Thank you, Anna Maria. I think I'll begin with you. I think you mentioned local. I think that's very important. I think we really need to understand the smaller units of power change. It doesn't happen at the central and national levels. And that transition, which I would probably even call it the closing phases of the Westphalian system, is upon us. And we need to embrace this through understanding that it's application of international law that should rule the day. I repeat this again. And smaller units of power, applying Maastricht Principles and connecting with Mother Nature is where this transition is going to take place. And that's where the realities have to come. And I'm glad that Rina mentioned ombudsperson and guardians of future generation and envoy being discussed. It was 1992 in the preparation of the Rio summit, the very first Rio summit, that the foreign minister of Malta said, we need a guardian of future generations. So that was in 1992. That's why I referred to 1990. It seems like that we jump a generation to get our things going. From 1990s to now, we had a resurgence in the 1990s for various reasons, international law really picking up. And now I see that happening now with these young people, over 3,000 cases, intergenerational application of synergetic efforts to bring accountability in the governance framework. Two quick examples on these things. There is a mushrooming of institutions for future generations, which is incredibly positive. And for example, the Wales Commissioner for Future Generations just completed 10 years of tenure. The World Future Council that I'm part of has been lobbying for these things for the long period of time. And Rina mentioned, for example, the last UN Secretary General's high-level report on intergenerational solidarity came after 4.5 or 5.5 years of lobbying to get a guardian for future generations into the outcome document in Rio Summit 2012. It ended up with 2 sentences, which led to a series of high-level consultations that finally ended up with the first policy brief, which was Think and Act for the Future. So it takes time, but it needs to keep going. And finally, 2 weeks ago, I'm part of a continuing discussion, what the European Union calls the drafting of an intergenerational fairness strategy. They've appointed for the first time a commissioner for intergenerational fairness, and happily he also comes from Malta. And maybe it's an opportunity to bring the Maastricht Principles to each and every of these processes. In fact, I did mention the Maastricht Principle. They're like, oh, where is it? Can we access it? And then we need to really start talking about what Sharon was mentioning. We need to get the Maastricht Principles easily accessible, translated into different languages. It's so important that we approach this, that we understand the cross-cultural dimension to this, and maybe other teams like Anna Maria, you, Camilla, and Seb over there, who's being really championing this effort, could capture the imagination like the young people from the Pacific to get this message into this decision-making process. And that's what the World Future Council has been doing, kind of approaching this from a solutions-based approach, challenging the notion that it is not only a human-centric approach to say generations yet unborn. We need to really compute the fact that we are living, breathing, sentient beings, and the air we breathe as the waters we drink are equally important. And that's where I do see a shift from the current paradigm of what you mentioned as the model, the economic exploitative model, possibility or paradigm of achieving Earth trusteeship as a model, possibly in the next 25 to 30 years, if not sooner.
Thank you very much, Nation. So let us finish the round with Milun.
Yeah, thanks very much, Anna Maria. I know we are done with the principles, we are done with the commentary, but I think in addition to all these institutional advances that we need to see, I would also like to see more work done on aligning the principles with some very basic principles of humanity, dignity, compassion, tolerance, love. I think we need to do much more work on that, because those are the values that we are moving away from all over the world. And those are the values that resonate with people on the ground. So I'd like to see some more work on that. Also, I think it's very important that I'm from India, and when I travel to different parts of the country, I see some tremendous work being done by indigenous tribal people, but people don't know about that. I think we really need to distribute and, to let people know that there are ways of living, of self-determination, and what Sharon has been speaking about. And we need, we don't need to sort of give up hope. These are like real cases happening, and we need to publicize them more. In terms of the policy and institutional implications, it's very easy to say, okay, what do we do at the UN? That's easy. We need more special rapporteurs, treaty bodies, universal periodic review. And that this issue comes squarely on the agenda of the UN Human Rights Council. That's very important. But I think what's more challenging and more critical is what do we do at the national and what Nishan said at the local level. I think generally people have grown, for right reasons, quite skeptical of what can be achieved at the international level and the lack of accountability to instruments and so on. So we need to really get down to the ground, work with civil society movements, local authorities, and well, wherever there's national human rights institutions and so on, but mainly with local bodies. It could be just a forum of communities, and really get this document into those forums for discussion. And whatever we do, I think has to, I don't think we have a choice anymore, has to resonate with people on the ground. And if it's not doing that, if it's not at least starting a conversation, I'm not saying it's going to change people's lives, then we are on the wrong track. And I really believe that we need to, I'm not saying move away, but not spend so much time on academic work, on legal work, on increasing the number of footnotes in documents. We really need to move away from that and work in simple, clear languages. We need a, I don't know, what would you call it, a sort of basic primer on the principles and the commentary, just a short document that's, well, what are the main points? Why is this important? Yeah, thanks very much.
Wow, thank you very much. These are very rich inputs. I will not summarize them. I just...
Anna Maria, sorry, I just had one more point.
Please.
I think it would be good to do advocacy work to have ombudspersons at the national level on future generations. That's really important. Okay, we can have somebody at the global level, but if we could have maybe a statutory office or something which reviews all national policy and laws and development initiatives and so on from the perspective of upholding the rights of future generations. I think that would be a major advance.
You just got a point of an example I wanted to mention. When we were in the process, a professor from Spain told us that in Spain, in the municipalities, they don't have an ombudsperson, which is also happening in some countries, but they have people in the parliament, 2 or 3 parliamentarians sitting in each parliament or each similar democratic body at local level to check the laws from this perspective. And I think that's great because sometimes ombudsmen appear in the process too late or are one person, but having a democratic process where we, for example, can have youth parliamentarians taking care of it could be an excellent example. What I know is that in Spain, it happened in many municipalities, and then it went to the autonomy level. And they were discussing the last time I got news to include this at the national level. So this could be one or the other, right? Maybe in the national human rights institutions, there could be a specific department taking care of the human rights of future generations. So very interesting. One example that I have mentioned many times, but I think is a first example on how to do that is the discussion on a law on mining in Colombia. Colombia is the country I come from originally. the people who put the discussion in the parliament said we need to rethink the concept of public utility under the principles on the human rights of future generations. Because normally public utility is sold by the mining companies as having a lot of money today or in the next 5 years, but all the impacts of the toxics used, all the impacts of the destruction of the nature are not taken into account as public inutility or public loss. And in this sense, we can rethink concepts that are given for defined, but maybe need to be redefined on the light of the principles, and the commentary could be very helpful in this task. So with this, I would like to open the floor. Fortunately, we now have 28 minutes. So let's take some questions and comments from the floor. We have also many in the Q&A. I will take some of them. We are not able to respond on all of you. Sorry for that. But maybe we begin with the people in the room. Any comment, question, remark, doubt you have? Oh, everything is crystal clear. Okay, let's read one of the questions here, just to break the ice. So Alessandro Drigo asks, what are the practical temporal limits for applying these principles, both into the future and the past? How can we avoid paralyzing the present due to uncertainty about the number of future rights bearers? Should we follow frameworks like seventh generation principle or rely on scientific predictions? So this is one. And I have here another one. What are some strategies being thought of too? One, approach power holders in different ways and through different narratives so they imbibe the principles. Second, this is more a remark, mobilize more of the indigenous and local communities' values towards common purpose. And three, focus on local, subnational, and bottom-up mobilization alongside top and down ones to find synergies. Traditional methods of communication or talking about human rights or policy change, as well as existing strategies, are not working. So community mobilization seems to be is. And then here one very pertinent, populism will affect our relationship with future generations. So maybe we begin with these three comments, and I will give the floor to the panelists that want to speak. So who would like to begin?
Practical temporal limits. I don't know. I mean, there's different ways of looking at that, but one very obvious one is if we get to the future generation, right? So obviously, I think the parts that are there in the commentary that hold current governments accountable for the damage they are causing, but also recognize steps that they may be taking so that future generations are not harmed is very important. But I also wanted to mention that the way in which the principles are drafted, there's also it's very flexible. So there's also the concept that as we move along in time, of course, these principles are based on existing international standards, but as we move along in time, there may be new human rights that are required or that come up, and there should be the space for that. So, I mean, that's what I would say. I don't know what others.
Yeah, I'll just compliment what Milion was saying. So practical limits, there are many. I think the first and foremost is the current paradigm where Ana Maria talked about the current model. That itself is a massive challenge because we are very much in the exploitative short-term, how can I get rich tomorrow without working kind of attitude, which is being sold as the way to go. But that's where, there's wonderful Asian proverb that we sometimes fail to listen to the growing forest. And that's what these young people are attempting to do. And they are challenging that status quo because that model has, has been challenged. There's a good question on, whether we can comprehend the 7 generational principles. In human terms, that's 180 years from now. How is our systems looking at Earth governance? Does the legal aspects complement the respect and the integrity of Earth systems? And this, this is what I think the indigenous worldviews are very important, whether it's Kaitiakitanga from the Maori worldview or Sila from the Iroquois worldview, that really embraces that we are one with the planet. We are not above or under it. Whereas the current economic model tells that we are the dominating species. That's very foolhardy. So we can do whatever we want to do with natural resources without forgetting that we are also natural resources because we do breathe and we still need oxygen and water. And final point about the limitations, I think this is where was already highlighted. There are significant cases. You mentioned Colombia, these practical examples of just challenging the business model, but there's also specific cases from the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, the European Court of Human Rights, as well as the International Court of Justice within this year that will look at the legal peripheries of human rights for future generations. And one of the, I learned from Milu, one of the co-authors of the commentary also presented this Maastricht Principles for consideration of the ICJ bench last December when the historic case of climate change was taken up. And then these decisions will be most probably delivered in the next 6 to 12 months. And that's where the complementarity comes up. As I mentioned, some of these principles on future generations was defined in and discussed in the legality of the threat of use of nuclear weapons. When Judge Veeramantri, Muhammad Shahabuddin, and Abdul Koroma, the 3 judges who dissented, categorically said that nuclear weapons are illegal under international law. And that's what needs to be heard. Not that only 3 out of the 15 said that. It was that 3 who are part of the growing forest said that. And that is challenging the status quo because we cannot continue, which we do today, of still building nuclear reactors, still doing all these things on nuclear, where we are just depositing the nuclear waste that's going to affect 30 to 40, 50,000 years and beyond. And that is not something we can comprehend even within the 7 generation principles. Are we not better than this in the 21st century? That's why Judge Veeramantri said this is the century of last opportunity to put our home in order. And these are many practical aspects, but we have the jurisprudence through the Maastricht Principles, we have the practical application. And just to final point on Milun, there's been success and failures of national level ombudspersons of going back to the early 1980s, beginning in Malta and in Hungary and Israel and other places. But there are models that can be improved. And this is the learning that we bring across from the World Future Council to the institutions that I mentioned. And that's where all of us also needs to unlearn certain ways of doing things and find a way to bring this renewed engagement of universalizing international law.
Excuse me. I think that the underlying principle about the 7th generation is that decisions that are being made today, what's the effect going to be on the 7th generation? And that's so people don't think that now we're going to get money from this mine or this operation and we'll take the money, but we don't think about the effect it's going to have on the 7th generation. So that's, that's how we're raised to think like that. But getting the idea out about decisions being made and having the time to make those decisions, because what happens quite frequently is industry comes in and they want to do something immediately as if it's going to, if they don't do it right away, things are going to, the world is going to stop. But they don't give the time, and they say, well, we don't have the time to do that. We don't have the time to do this, with, that sort of stuff. But like with the nuclear waste, half-life is what, 10,000 years? And more or less, okay, a couple thousand years. But I was on the panel in Strasbourg in 1993 on the World Uranium hearings. And we were hearing evidence, and one of the things that was told to us by a scientist from the UK talking about nuclear waste, she said, you could find a place to store nuclear waste, but how do you alert the future generations about the presence of nuclear waste and the dangers of nuclear waste? And she said, because now in computers, you can't read what's written in the 1950s. You can't even read what was written in like 3 years ago. And so she made the stark recommendation that we have to depend on Indigenous peoples' oral history. That will be able to tell people, no, you can't dig there because that's a nuclear waste dump. Because even if you made markers on the stone or whatever you're going to cover it with, people in the future would not know what that is. But that Indigenous peoples would know what that was because we have an oral tradition. And so she said that, and I was I don't think she knew who I was. I mean, we were just, judges. And so she said that, and afterwards I talked to her, and she said, oh, I didn't know, she said, I came to that conclusion on herself because she knew that there was no way to alert people in the future that there's nuclear waste there. There's no way to tell people don't dig there. She said you can bury it, but how long can you keep it buried? So I think we have we have a lot of things to contribute, but a lot of things to explore too about how this is going to happen. Because now, sorry to go on about this, but now because people are having problems with energy and everything, there's a huge uptake now on resuming nuclear power as quote unquote clean energy. But most of that uranium is being mined in our territories, and huge problems with mining uranium. It's gigantic. And then mining, processing, using storage, all these things. And people are saying, well, nuclear power is a clean energy. Well, clean for who? So like they have to think about the long-term implications of that. And I think that's how we should approach everything that's going on now, is what are the long-term implications of doing something like that?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Sharon. And I think this question on how do we tell the coming generations that the nuclear waste is there, bring us to rethink the concept of accountability and reparations or prevention from this approach. It's not about just putting some earth over something. Part of this could be the right to information of the future generations, right?
Yep.
How do you collect the information? Who protects the information? And in this sense, I see here a question from Rebecca Schut, who is a convener of the Impact Coalition on International Judicial Institutions, the executive director of Citizens for Global Solutions. And Rebecca asks, how can concepts of reparations and/or restorative justice link current generations to justice on behalf of our ancestors and help clear the path for future generations? Big, huge question, but maybe we can elucidate a little bit. Maybe before we go into these questions, I would like to check if there is somebody from the floor. Please. Ule.
You want me to speak?
You can speak.
Maybe for the listener.
Yeah.
Well, maybe that's not so important. Maybe I can be down. Thank you very much to the distinguished panelists. I would like to ask you brilliant legal minds here at the table, which strategic litigation cases would you like to see to bring these principles to a test to be developed in courts? And at which levels?
Yeah, maybe I can. I'll speak to the first question, which concerned remedies, I guess, and looking at that. I mean, we had last year a Secretary General's report on loss and damage and human rights, which explored different aspects of remedies and reparations in the context of climate change. But just thinking about the climate change context here, I mean, of course, the urgent, equitable phase out of fossil fuels and transition away from them is one essential aspect of non-repetition and cessation of harm, which is also part of remedies. But then, as has been pointed out by others, like the mining and extractive economy aspect and the non-repetition of that kind of economic model as well is a crucial aspect of remedies because yeah, not only is our over half of transition minerals on indigenous lands, and then I think another 1/3 are on peasant communities' lands. But and in addition to the human rights abuses that we see kind of repeating in these value chains, we also know that that critical minerals are also not, they're also a finite resource and will not last forever. And for instance, lithium is one of the rarest elements in the universe. So really thinking about those long-term things as well when we replace systems that we don't reproduce inequality and injustice, but also don't reproduce an eventually unsustainable model. So. Thanks.
Sure. So 2 questions. Hi, Rebecca. Thank you for joining. Pleasure to have your question. One quick case study, which is possibly really important. Again, I'm drawing from the wisdom of Judge Veeramantri. He chaired what is known as the Nauru Commission. After the Second World War, there were many parts of the earth that did not have a government, elected government. So Nauru was one of them, and this was handed over as a trusteeship territory to the Australian government to be looked after. And Nauru was rich with phosphate. So what happened was the Australian government went in and dug it all up in a few years. Millions and millions of worth in terms of the economic indicator we have, which is GDP. So the Nauru Commission went into it and found that the Australian government has violated their commitment as trusteeship holders, and they were required to repair and pay damages and compensation to at that time the people of Nauru. And then this commission, and then later Nauru took Australia to court in the International Court of Justice, and the decision was taken on that. It's an interesting case study. Unfortunately, what happened was Nauru did receive their compensation from the Australian government. It's interesting to see what happened thereafter. It's a lot of money to a group of people that did not know how to manage that. And so there had to be support to ensuring that it is managed properly. So what happened was that money was misappropriated, and they went back to a cycle of poverty. And this comes back to the point that, and Arina was also talking about, how are we questioning the current accountability framework? And I do really think, Rebecca, that the Maastricht Principles, setting out articles, 33 to 36, does look at this in a more strategic way from a human rights and future generations point of view. But there is this rich discourse on jurisprudence that looks at reparations and its impact of future generations. And this is something that Judge Veeramantri also set out in the nuclear weapons dissenting opinion that he wrote. And on a quick one on to Ole, very important questions. I think we need to find how this can be featured. Already, Margareta and various others have tabled and used the Maastricht Principles, supporting the arguments before the International Court of Justice. But at a much strategic level, I think it is important to bring this to proceedings against key businesses that are violating the basic norms of stewardship, knowing very well, even sometimes going to the extent of using the future generations paradigm, because that is also, in this term of populism, we have the situation of governments joining by certain corporate entities that what we call hijacking these terms. and using their own for that benefit. And this is where I think, coming back to Milun's earlier point, we need to strategically think about these values that drive this. Otherwise, we're going to have another very much, oh, here's our work on future generations, fantastic, here's our report on future generations. But what has been the impact of it? Has it changed? Has it been transformative? I think that's where I think there are cases going on. There's fantastic cases in Germany, for example, fantastic leaders from Peru who's challenging, businesses on how this is done. And these are not isolated cases. That's strategic, and that's where the synergy needs to be drawn in. And last point, there has been a lot of work on crimes against future generations. So one of the movements today is on ecocide, complete destruction. It's not about trying to legally define ecocide and get it into the Rome Statute. Yes, it is important, but is that the only thing? When we really know that a nuclear reactor is actually damaging tens of thousands of years into the future, and we are still investing in that? Something is missing. So I think that's where strategic thinking and this cross-disciplinary value system needs to be brought into strategic litigation. And has never been up to lawyers. If you really look at the young people from the Pacific, or the people who actually took the case of nuclear weapons to the court, they were mothers, a kindergarten teacher named Alan Ware, who is also Right Livelihood laureate. They are the ones who championed this. And we are 100 years since the Kellogg-Briand Pact, which 15 years before the UN Charter talked about war is illegal. And that's the preambular clause of the Charter of the United Nations. And here we are, 180 plus armed conflicts going across the world. Each one of them is a crime against future generations. Each one, every bomb, every bullet that is being shot is a crime against future generations. Why are we hesitant to call it that? Why are we okaying war in the 21st century? I'm assuming humans are a bit better than that, but maybe I'm wrong. But this is where we really need to understand that it is not just a charter that said this, that there's, we can go into the Article 29, subsection 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights talks about rights only if you recognize the duties that you have to the community. If you do not recognize the responsibility, there is no rights. And if we forgot that passage of time, we are just going blindly into the future. That's why I really want to pick up Katia Kitanga again and other indigenous builders. They say sometimes in our worldview, we don't go forward to the future. We got to make sure we have a firm face looking back to our ancestors, and we go backwards into the future. If you turn your back on your past, that's the damage that you're doing already. That's the current model, and we got to change that.
Thank you very much. Please, do you want?
Thank you so much. So a bit of a follow-up on the strategic litigation. So I'm part of the Swedish family litigation case where we represent 300 children and youth. And so we included a lot in our application on the rights of children, youth, and future generations. And we just received the decision from the Supreme Court a few weeks ago where the Supreme Court said that we had in no way shown the special vulnerability of children, of the group we represent. And they did not even mention children or youth or future generations in the entire decision, despite that being a very, basic part of this case. And so I guess my question is, how do we raise awareness among local courts and national courts about both the rights and special vulnerabilities of children and future generations? Thank you.
That's very important, and it's also nice to have a youth representative here because we felt in our panel to have one of you. I don't know if any one of you want to answer to this question. I also have some points because, of course, this question of Ule was very attractive on what to claim, but maybe.
No, just to say for the last question, thank you. Actually, the principles do address the importance of, they say that as children and youth are closest in time to generations still to come, They occupy a unique position and have an important role to play in protecting and advancing the human rights of future generations. So to quote the principles, they acknowledge the perspectives of children and youth and participation in decision-making with respect to long-term and intergenerational risks that their views must be accorded special weight. So that's something that you can probably use.
Thank you, Milun. You want to say
Yeah,
something?
about the same, I'm sure.
No, I just wanted to say that I began many years ago working about the justiciability of economic, social, and cultural rights, which means we claim we get a decision and we hope this to be implemented, or we put pressure. And I have like two sides of it. One side is a side of disappointment. I do not have as much faith in courts now, not because of only because of the courts, but because the rule of law is lost. And that's where I don't want to say that strategic litigation is not important. We need to continue. And for example, in the struggle for the right to food, in '86, every government and every judge would say there is not a right to food. And nowadays we have a huge body of law and we have decisions everywhere. So it should happen if you keep on. But I think that we don't get these decisions if we do not have the needed critical mass. And I know in Sweden you are a good critical mass of young people. I am not saying that you are not doing that, but that's where I would like to connect with the idea of Milun of having these dialogues. And dialogues is with everyone. What happens if the dialogue is between the judge and the grandchild of the judge? Maybe it changes if the grandchild of the judge has the arguments to convince his grandfather. So, and connecting to values. Unfortunately, more than a crisis of the rule of law, we have a crisis of values in these societies. And therefore, when we speak to social movements, many social movements tell us, we don't want human rights because it's you made everything too technical. You always speak about respect, protect, fulfill, but we still are dying on hunger. Yeah, and they got a point. It doesn't mean that we will erase all what we got with the human rights. But if we do not connect the nice theory and the nice laws to what people are living, and if we do not find other ways to present the problems and to tackle the problems, I don't see a future for international law. And it's very weird for me to say that. I am a very positive person, but I think we need to connect to the people again. And maybe, yeah, very short regarding the strategic litigation. I have been reading in the last days about the antimicrobial resistance, which means that now the way the food system is, for example, producing food with all the pesticides and agrochemicals, or treating the animals all crowded with thousands of antibiotics, etc., is bringing to a huge health policy problem that is that antibiotics will stop being effective. So the future generations may not have the protection that we have now due to the way we are producing food and producing animals. I think that would be a very interesting case. I don't know if it is only for litigation, but this is a problem every one of us has that is relevant. And the second one, I was speaking today with some people in my organization working with the Maasai people in Tanzania. And big investors are just destroying these people slowly to put hunting businesses and tourism. And this is really not only the right of the present Maasai, but maybe the Maasai will disappear or their culture will disappear. And I think they told us all avenues of strategic litigation at national level have been used, and we do not have a solution. So maybe we could think on some international strategic litigation connected with other strategies that should support the litigation. Sorry, I'm the facilitator, but I am passionate with this topic. I would give each one of you 1 minute to give a final message. It's desperate time, but we have to keep on. right? There have been other desperate times. So let's hear some positive messages. Okay, we begin with the women then. Sharon, would you like to begin?
I just, our old people always tell us, never give up. Keep on going. There's always something that'll come about that'll open a small window that you can use to go through, but never give up. That's what they always tell us. Don't give up, because it's so easy when you see everything happening. You just throw your hands up and say, that's it, I'm done. But our old people tell us, don't do that. So that's my message. Don't do that. Just keep going. Well, something will happen. Maybe there might be a possibility for litigation or something like that. But we have to keep looking.
Yeah, maybe just to say that there's also hope amidst all the dismal things that are happening, and I mean, still you do see human rights being brought to the center in certain places, and that's a fight we have to keep moving forward. Like the Secretary General's critical minerals panel, there, for instance, you had these principles that underline that work, and the first principle is on human rights. So like even with the backlash, there's still some advances like that, and then ultimately just remembering kind of the point of human rights, which is really to go to the people, as you were saying, and piercing all the other layers that there are, and I think ultimately people tend to be on the right side of history in many cases, even when we don't see that from states, and just kind of going more towards that direction in the future. Thanks.
You know, one of the weaknesses of the human rights framework is that it heavily depends on state accountability. And more states are moving away from that accountability and that responsibility. So I think instead of being depressed about that, I think what we need to do is to, the point I was making, I think Nishan was making, that move to local and national arenas and work much more on self-determination. And I was actually very happy to hear from Sharon earlier today that some of the indigenous groups are bringing the issue of self-determination back to the Human Rights Council as well. But I think it's very important to work with the communities that are demonstrating that you can have a viable life for now and for future generations without really involving the state. And there are many examples of that, whether it's self-governance examples or it's biodiversity examples. So I think we need to align what is in the principles with that. And I'm also conscious of there's a lot of skepticism amongst social movements about human rights, partly because it's very sort of state-centric, and they want to move away from a world where everything depends on the state. So where that takes us, I don't know, but I really think we need to look at that and look at other arenas, environmental justice, the values that we're talking about. Maybe we need to go back to people like Mahatma Gandhi. We need to go back to, others who spoke about values and a multilateral system that was based on values and not only on state responsibility. Thanks.
Thank you. In 60 seconds, I think the values are represented by Greta Yu, what we're talking about. The principles are not in a document with 1,000+ references. Is what you all have been doing in Sweden through the Aurora case is epitomizing, fighting for the closest proximal ancestors to future generations, that's you and children. So thank you for doing that. Two things. First, what you are doing here complements the young people from the Pacific who's now moved the world to go to the ICJ. The International Court of Justice works alongside and influences the Supreme Court of Sweden. Right now, they may not take that as serious. But remember that every time you take up an argument, you are challenging the status quo. And that is the inspiration for international law. It might take 25 years for us to get there. It might not. But again, try to listen to what you're already doing, because you are part of a growing forest. And that's a huge inspiration for universalizing international law. You're not in isolation. There are over 3,000 young people, the 3,000 cases with young people across the planet, where mountains and rivers from Autoria, New Zealand to the United States to Latin America, the rights are being recognized. The mountains are coming to court. The rivers are coming to court. The forests are coming to court. When Tonio Poza walked into the Supreme Court of the Philippines in 1993 and said generations yet unborn has a right to be heard today, many people thought, oh, what's this guy doing here? He has no idea what he's talking about. But what did the Supreme Court of Philippines say? They said, yes, not only generations here today, generations yet unborn has a voice today in this court. And that was 1993. So don't forget that you're a part of that rich history that connects us across ancestors for international law. So thank you.
Thank you very much to all of you. I think it's very interesting to have all these different perspectives from courts, from the people on the grassroots, from the international communities, from the indigenous peoples. I am very close to peasants and people fighting for food sovereignty. And I think you have, from this appetizer, you have many plates that you maybe like, and we hope that you continue cooking our future and the future of our people. And with that, I want to thank Camila for all the support in preparing. Without Camila, Seb, Felix, let's say CIEL, we wouldn't have this meeting today. And also to all of you, we had at some point 103 people participating. Now we have still 91. So thank you for the people on the other side. And to all of you, we will have some food to continue thinking. Thank you very much. Good night.